This is part 2 of Men, Women, and Transgender before biological women are canceled. Hey guys, my name is Jason Wesley, and this is not a podcast. So if you've made it through part 1 and your head hasn't exploded yet, just wait. It's gonna get better.
Is there anything you can say on your behalf?
I'm trans?
You just won HR.
So in this episode, we're going to go into a little bit more of the psychology and epidemiology of transgenderism. But if you made it through part 1, you're probably thinking to yourself, Jason, what is transgenderism? It's also known as gender dysphoria according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the DSM-5. DSM-5 states that the initial condition for the identification of gender dysphoria in both adults and teenagers is a noticeable incongruence between the gender the patient believes they are and what society perceives them to be. The DSM-5 indicates that the prevalence of gender dysphoria is 0.005 to 0.014% for adult born as males, whereas it is 0.002 to 0.003% for adult born as females. Among children, it is higher in those born as boys, where it is 2 to 4.5 times greater than those born as girls. Among teenagers, there's no real difference between males and females. I remember when who I was psychologically wasn't who I identified as. For me, it wasn't me identifying as a girl. I identified as Spider-Man, and then I identified as Superman. And then one day I decided to climb up to the top of the roof and jump off and attempt to fly. And that's when my mom, who knew the identity God created, alerted me that I needed to get off the roof before I broke my neck trying to jump off. And I'm just gonna throw this out there. Every year men battle prostate cancer, among others, and according to the American Cancer Society, estimates for prostate cancer in the United States for 2021 are about 34,130 deaths from prostate cancer. Women every year battle with endometrial cancer, cervical cancer, and ovarian cancers. Over 40,000 women die from breast cancer alone in the United States. Men don't get endometrial cancer, women don't get prostate cancer. Back to gender dysphoria. The big difference between someone who is gay, bisexual, or lesbian and someone who is transgender is that the L, G, and B, it's about sexual preference, and transgender is about identity. Gender dysphoria is considered a mental disorder according to the DSM-5. And in a long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery, cohort study in Sweden found persons with transsexualism after sex reassignment have considerably higher risk for mortality, suicidal behavior, and psychiatric morbidity than the general population. Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism and should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group. In 2016, under the Obama administration, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services revisited the question of whether sex reassignment surgery would have to be covered under Medicare plans. Despite receiving a request that its coverage be mandated, it refused on the ground that we lack evidence that it benefits patients. The 4 best designed and conducted studies that assessed quality of life before and after surgery using validated psychometric studies did not demonstrate clinically significant changes or differences in psychometric test results after gender reassignment surgery. The Obama Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services pointed out the 19 times greater likelihood for death by suicide and a host of other poor outcomes. The mortality was primarily due to completed suicides, but death due to neoplasm and cardiovascular disease was increased 2 to 2.5 times as well. We note, mortality from this patient population did not become apparent until after 10 years. The risk for psychiatric hospitalization was 2.8 times greater than in controls even after adjustment for prior psychiatric disease. The risk for attempted suicide was greater in male to female patients regardless of the gender of the control. Even the new assistant HHS secretary, Dr. Richard/Rachel Levine, is transgender. She was questioned by Rand Paul about children and genital mutilation.
That 80 to 95% of prepubertal children with gender dysphoria will experience resolution by late adolescence if not exposed to medical intervention and social affirmation. Dr. Levine, do you believe that minors are capable of making such a life-changing decision as changing one's sex?
Well, Senator, thank you for your interest in this question. Transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field with robust research and standards of care that have been developed. And if I am fortunate enough to be confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Health, I would look forward to working with you and your office and coming to your office and discussing the particulars of the standards of care for transgender medicine.
The specific question was about minors. Let's be a little more specific since you evaded the question. Do you support the government intervening to override the parent's consent to give a child puberty blockers, cross-sex sex hormones and or amputation surgery of breasts and genitalia. You have said that you're willing to accelerate the protocols for street kids. I'm alarmed that you won't say with certainty that minors should not have the ability to make the decision to take hormones that will affect them for the rest of their life. Will you make a more firm decision on whether or not minors should be involved in these decisions?
Senator, transgender medicine is a very complex and nuanced field, and if confirmed to the position of Assistant Secretary of Health, I would certainly be pleased to come to your office and talk with you and your staff about the standards of care and the complexity of this field.
Let it go into the record that the witness refused to answer the question.
Here, Dr. Levine advocates for sex change operations for children.
So the protocol developed in the Netherlands has two phases. The first phase, at the young adolescent age, is to give what are called a pubertal blocker, to give a medicine to block the progression of puberty so you don't go through the wrong puberty. And then to continue some counseling. And then somewhere between 14 and 16 years of age to start slowly cross-gender hormones. Under 18, and they're not an emancipated minor, meaning if they're under 18 and they are on the street or they're completely emancipated from their parents, then you can do treatment. I can reassure you that Governor Wolf and our administration are very completely supportive for LGBT individuals and programs and transgender individuals. That way, for a transgender woman, male to female, their voice doesn't drop, they don't have hair, they don't have to have electrolysis. For a transgender man, they don't have breast development that will need surgery, they don't have periods, etc. So you block puberty, and then you can, at the appropriate time, send them through the puberty consistent with their gender identity. Does that make sense?
The good news is, whether you agree with it or not, transgender surgery is now free for the military thanks to a Biden executive order. Tucked down in the executive order on enabling all qualified Americans to serve their country in uniform, it says the Secretary of Defense also concluded that it was appropriate to create a process that would enable service members to take steps to transition gender while serving. But wait, that's not all. If you're a parent in California, minors may get sex changes without parental consent if California's teachers union has its way. On January 6th, CTA changed an existing policy to explicitly include transgender and non-binary youth among the students who can leave class without parental permission to receive birth control, abortions, and other such services. Now, we were told that hormones added to your food was horrible, but now they're advocating that we inject it into your body even as a child. And you think it stops there? No. Eventually, you'll be thrown in jail if you don't affirm your child's identity and support hormone therapy. I wish I was being hyperbolic.
Here I am sitting there as a parent watching a perfectly healthy child be destroyed. And there's nothing I can do but sit on the sideline and, according to Justice Bowden at the time, cheer it on. I could only affirm or get thrown in jail.
According to the courts, however, Rob's consent wasn't relevant. In fact, Justice Bowden went one step further, declaring that Rob and his wife had to affirm their daughter's new gender identity. Rob was told that if he tried to dissuade his daughter or referred to her as a girl, he would be considered guilty of family violence. The night of the ruling, Rob granted an interview to The Federalist, lamenting the state-sponsored transition of his mentally vulnerable daughter. He also pointed out that his daughter was biologically a girl and would simply have her health impaired by high-dosage testosterone. The interview infuriated the BC Supreme Court. A few weeks later, Justice Francesca Mazzari convicted Rob of family violence for using female pronouns. To make sure Rob didn't refer to his daughter as a girl again, Mazzari signed a protection order authorising the police to immediately arrest Rob without warrant if he was caught referring to his daughter as a girl or with female pronouns.
What if the state forced your child to be implanted with an RFID chip against your consent? I mean, the technology is already here, so where is the line? And it ain't safe for anybody out here in these unlimited gender streets. There's a California bill requiring gender-neutral stores that fines retailers $1,000 for having separate boy and girl toy departments. Is there a line anymore? Is there such thing as an X and Y chromosome? Now, I've said this for years. The next thing considered to be normalized is going to be pedophilia.
And when I saw Jerry Sandusky walk out in handcuffs, I did kind of feel a bit sorry for him, even though I know the jury found him to do some horrific things. I was like, you know, his life is over. All of these young boys, it was terrible for them as well. There are no winners. In your piece, you say someone has no choice to be a pedophile, but someone can choose to not be a child molester.
Now, if parents can't have a say in what happens to their children, but they have to affirm what their child wants sexually, then this video is okay.
You're wanting to continue with touching me, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Continue doing sexual stuff? Mm-hmm. Why?
Because I like it.
You like it?
And because it feels good.
Because it feels good.
And it feels good like it feels good to you.
It does feel good to me, although I become much more uncomfortable with the idea of doing it since you are 6 and I'm also your dad.
And if that's okay, then this should be completely normal and not mentally ill as well. Transgender man identifies as dog to bring him closer to his husband. Andrew added, I hang out and I provide him with lots of attention and tell him that he's a good boy. That's basically 90% of it. But that doesn't mean Tony doesn't think of himself as a real dog. He states confidently that he identifies as a dog and says pet play is about getting into the headspace of the animal. So you have to get out of the headspace of being a human and get into the headspace of being a dog.
What the hell is that? I don't know what that is.
But what if we take this a step further than you believing that you're a dog? What if you believe that you're a cat and you take steps to transform your external body to look more like a cat?
Dennis began turning himself into a tiger 20 years ago. So far, undergoing 10 extreme body modification surgeries, which has cost him nearly $200,000.
It's literally been everything I could afford since I started.
Catman will stop at nothing to make his outer tiger match his inner tiger. Currently, he's researching surgery that will allow him to walk on all fours.
I'll be happy with where I'm at and where things are going when I reach the point to look like that.
Now, does that mean that I have to believe that he's a cat too? Or can I believe that he believes that he's a cat and still maintain that it's not true? The emasculation of society has been going on for quite some time, and it cuts deeper than you think. Now, let's take a look back at history at a thing called buck-breaking. Buck-breaking came to life when African slaves' rebellions had increased. It first started with the stripping of male slaves and having them flogged while other slaves watched. With time, it graduated into stripping and raping them. This act spared no male. It affected both children and men. Buck-breaking was done to cripple the ego and strength of the male slaves. Most slaves, after being raped, committed suicide as they could not live with the shame. History archives have it that buck-breaking wasn't only a white master to African male slave thing. Most times, 2 or more African male slaves were forced to rape each other. Buck-breaking was also done in the presence of little male slaves and the male slaves' families so as to show superiority of the white master over the male slave leader. Buck-breaking crippled most little revolutions as it made slaves weak and less motivated. It broke the spirit of the African male slaves and made them feel less masculine. Some records have it that sagging originated from buck-breaking. Slave masters forced male slaves to sag as to let everyone, including their white slave masters, know they have already been raped. Then male slaves who sagged wore no pants, boxers, so their buttocks stayed out. Now, what we're dealing with is an identity crisis, and not just an identity when it comes to race and when it comes to sexual preference or identity. There's been an attack on Christians as well as Christianity and religion as a whole. And as a result, we've seen skyrocketing suicide rates. According to a peer-reviewed study, 2 studies in the United States suggest persons with a religious affiliation have less suicidal ideation than unaffiliated persons. If you believe that you were created by God in His image, your identity is no longer in your race, ethnicity, sexual preference, or any of that. Your identity is in Him, the creator of the universe, and He says that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. I see an entire generation of people trying to do things externally while everything internally is left in shambles. And if I just change this one thing, it'll make me happy. If I just do this one thing, it'll make me better. If I just do this thing externally or carnally, my spirit will be at peace and I'll be happy. If I just change this person, I'll be happy. What do others think of me rather than what does God think of me? You know, one of the names of God is Jehovah Rapha, the Lord our healer or great physician. That brokenness that you feel inside can be overcome, but not by changing the external, but by changing the internal from the inside out, accepting the you that God created. You were made your height for a purpose, your eyes, your skin color, your hair, all the things that you're supposed to have, and God thinks it's so amazing and beautiful. But more importantly, God sees the inner you. He sees your heart. He sees your spirit, and He wants that connection with you. Stop running from Him and open your heart and your mind into seeking Him. And the transition that you seek, Jehovah Rapha, will be the only physician you need.
Your glory, God, is what our hearts long for, to be overcome by your presence, Lord.